Everyone knew Pat Boone as America's clean-cut singer, the man who refused to kiss his co-star on screen, the voice that sold millions of records to church-going families. But underneath that polished image, something else was happening. A rock and roll legend accused him of stealing his sound. A savings and loan accused him of fraud. Then, in 1997, he walked onto a stage in black leather and lost his audience overnight. Through all of it, one person stood beside him. The love of his life. At 91, with her gone, Pat is finally saying things he kept hidden for decades. The making of an all-American icon. Pat Boone entered the world on June 1, 1934, in Jacksonville, Florida. His parents had been expecting a girl and were ready to name the baby Patricia. Instead, they got a boy, but the nickname stuck. Charles Eugene Boone became Pat Boone almost by accident. That small family mix-up gave him something unforgettable, a name people remembered. When he was only 2, his family moved to Nashville, and that move shaped the rest of his life. He grew up in a city where music was everywhere. Church singing, talent shows, radio, community events. By age 12, Pat was already singing in public across Nashville. By high school, that local promise had turned into something much bigger. At David Lipscomb High School, Pat was student body president, captain of the baseball team, and voted most popular boy. He hosted a teen talent show on local radio while still in school. Before he ever sold records across the country, he was already moving through life like a hometown star. His father, Archie, worked as a contractor. His mother, Margaret, was a registered nurse. Pat Boone was not stepping out of privilege into the spotlight. He was stepping out of a hard-working American home and building that spotlight himself. Then there was the Boone name itself. One of the most eye-catching parts of Pat's public identity was the claim that he was connected to Daniel Boone, the famous frontier hero. That tied him to an old American myth. Later, some genealogy discussions raised questions about the exact line of descent, but the effect remained. The Boone name gave him an all-American shine that fit his public image almost perfectly. The love story that began at 16. That polished image was already in place by the time his personal life took a serious turn. At 16, while attending David Lipscomb High School, Pat met Shirley Foley. The moment stayed with him. He saw her while she was speaking to his coach, asked to be introduced, and the attraction hit both of them right away. Pat later said they were holding hands the very first time they met. Something about Shirley clearly landed hard with him. What made their early relationship even more surprising was how slowly it moved. For 9 full months, they did not kiss. Pat said he held back on purpose because he did not want the relationship to become shallow or rushed. He wanted it to mean more than ordinary teenage excitement. Then, after a school hayride, the long wait finally ended. Shirley's response? After all that time, she expected more. Shirley was not just any girl from school. She was the daughter of Red Foley, one of the biggest country music stars of that era. So, falling for Shirley also meant stepping into a family that already understood fame. Even before his own stardom exploded, Pat was learning how public image and family legacy could shape a person's life. When Shirley's family planned to move away, Pat did something bold. At just 19, he went straight to Red Foley and asked for Shirley's hand in marriage. According to Pat, Red Foley agreed and even helped with the rings. Controversy that never died. Around that same period, his career was beginning to explode. In 1954 and 1955, Pat Boone signed with Doty Records and scored his first major breakout with a cover of Fats Domino's. Ain't That a Shame? Boone's version was smoother, safer, and easier for mainstream white radio to embrace. At the same time, the attention also pushed listeners toward Fats Domino's original. By the late 1950s, Pat Boone had become so big that Billboard data placed him second only to Elvis Presley during that era. But that strange position became even clearer with his cover of Little Richard's Tutti Frutti. Boone's version sold more than 1 million copies. Little Richard's original was wild, electric, and full of explosive energy. Boone's version softened that edge into something more acceptable to conservative radio and white family living rooms. That pattern was part of a much larger system. Some white families reportedly kept Little Richard's version hidden, while Boone's record sat out in plain view. The music itself was wanted, but the black artist who created that raw power often was not welcomed the same way. Little Richard himself did not hide how he felt. He believed Pat Boone had been used to block him out of white homes. In a 2024 interview that resurfaced widely after Little Richard's posthumous honors at the Grammys, his estate reiterated that the cover system of the 1950s caused generational wealth gaps that still affect black artists' families today. That debate never really disappeared. Even as recently as February 2025, when the Recording Academy announced new legacy royalties for pre-1972 artists, cultural critics pointed to Boone's covers as a prime example of what needed correcting. The movie star who wouldn't kiss. While all this was happening in music, Boone was also becoming a television star. At just 23, he hosted the Pat Boone Chevy Showroom, which ran for 115 episodes on national television. What made his public image even more unusual was that during all this success, he still completed his education. Pat Boone graduated from Columbia University magna cum laude in 1958, a detail that still surprises because it cuts against the usual image of a teen idol. Hollywood had also noticed him. In the late 1950s, studios saw him as a safe investment. One of the clearest examples came with April Love. The film did well, but the title song became even bigger, reaching #1 and receiving an Academy Award nomination in 1957. Then there was the moment that captured his image better than almost anything else. During April Love, Pat Boone refused to kiss Shirley Jones on the lips. At the time, it became major news because it made his moral code feel very real and very strict. For some people, that made him admirable. For others, that made him seem almost unbelievable. His film career also brought him into bigger studio productions. In Journey to the Center of the Earth, Boone shared the screen with James Mason in a major studio adventure film that still has cult status today. Fox reportedly made a major deal with him for 3 films at $200,000, each an enormous amount in the early 1960s. The trouble was that audiences already saw him in one fixed way. He had become too closely linked with safety and clean living. That image had made him rich, but it also became a cage. The marriage that survived everything. Pat Boone's marriage did not begin in some calm, settled season. In November 1953, Pat and Shirley Foley eloped when they were both only 19. Pat later said they had Shirley's father's consent, but his own parents were not really part of the decision. Before they could even catch their breath, family life came rushing in. Pat and Shirley had 4 daughters in just 5 years: Cherry, Lindy, Debbie, and Lori. While Pat was still trying to finish college at Columbia and performing across the country, Shirley was raising one child after another. Shirley was never just the woman at home waiting for her famous husband to return. She was the one holding the whole structure in place. She raised 4 small children, managed the home, and protected the family from falling apart, while Pat studied and performed. In a very real sense, his rise stood on her ability to keep normal life working when nothing about their life was normal. Shirley was a recording artist, a television host, a writer, and later a serious force in philanthropy. She was not just support. She was a hidden builder of the life. Everyone else was watching. The leather jacket that broke everything. After years of being seen as clean and dependable, Pat Boone suddenly did something that stunned almost everybody. In 1997, he appeared at the American Music Awards dressed in black leather, metal studs, fake tattoos, and a hard rock style to promote his album in a metal mood. No more Mr. Nice Guy. To some people, it looked funny. To others, it looked ridiculous. But to many of his Christian fans, it felt like a deep betrayal. The damage was even worse, because the backlash did not mainly come from outsiders. It came from his own audience. Trinity Broadcasting Network had been airing his gospel program, Gospel America. After that award show appearance, angry viewers flooded the network with complaints. The response was so fierce that the network pulled the show. Boone later said people thought he had sold out. That one stunt cracked his image right inside the very world that had defended him for years. In 2025, When a documentary about celebrity image implosions aired on Netflix, Boone's metal era was featured alongside other infamous rebranding failures, introducing a new generation to the moment his audience walked away. The legal troubles and family tragedy. But even before that public mess, there had been another hard blow. In 1988, Boone's Christian label, Lamb and Lion Records, filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The company had $355,689 in unsecured debt. Send only $355,689 in unsecured debts. Send only $62,416 in assets. Then a savings and loan institution filed suit, claiming Boone and a former executive had taken part in a fraudulent plan to move money for themselves. Boone denied it, but the accusations still mattered, because his whole public image had been built on trust and moral safety. Then, life hit him in the most personal way of all. In 2001, his eldest grandson, Ryan Corbin, suffered a horrifying accident. He fell through a skylight and dropped 3 stories onto a concrete floor. He was only 24. The injuries included brain damage and a fractured skull. Boone later called it the worst day of his life. Ryan survived after major treatment, but survival did not erase the trauma. On the 25th anniversary of the accident in 2026, Boone spoke briefly about it in a charity video, saying, "You never forget the sound of that phone ringing." The woman who started Mercy Corps. Through all of this, Shirley Boone's own life kept proving that she was far more than the woman standing next to a celebrity. Shirley played a major role in starting Save the Refugee Fund during the Cambodian crisis, and that effort later became part of what grew into Mercy Corps. Today, Mercy Corps is known around the world as a major humanitarian organization. It started in a family living room with a crisis far away, and a woman who decided that seeing suffering meant doing something. Pepperdine University remembered Shirley Boone as a major force whose generosity would shape students for generations. Her faith was not decorative. Her generosity was not for show. It was part of the structure of her life. The final heartbreak. In 2018, Shirley Boone was diagnosed with vasculitis, an inflammatory disease that attacks blood vessels. What made it especially cruel was how fast things changed. Her condition worsened quickly. She died at home in Beverly Hills on January 11, 2019, at the age of 84, with Pat and their daughters beside her singing hymns. Her death did not just end a marriage, it ended a partnership that had lasted 65 years and survived fame, pressure, parenthood, public scrutiny, and time itself. Pat later wrote that she had simply changed her address. That line says so much about how he carried the loss. After 65 years of marriage, he was suddenly alone. The Beverly Hills home they had shared for decades became a place filled with memory instead of conversation. Pat later said in the simplest words possible, "Gosh, I miss her." He said he had only parted from his better half for a little while because he believed they would meet again. Life at 91. At 91, Pat Boone's life does not read like an ordinary retirement. It feels more like a final act shaped by faith, loss, memory, and stubborn energy. On his 91st birthday in June 2025, instead of making the day about himself, Boone used it to support clean water efforts for children in Tanzania. He said what would make him happiest was knowing those children could drink clean water and grow up healthy. In January 2026, Boone announced a rare live performance with his daughter Debbie, scheduled for late spring. Debbie, known for "You Light Up My Life," has been helping her father navigate life after Shirley. The event is framed as a special evening of songs and stories. Speaking to a Nashville radio station in February 2026, Boone reflected, "People ask if I regret the leather jacket. I don't. I regret that Shirley wasn't there to laugh at it with me. She was always the one who kept me from taking myself too seriously." That is the real Pat Boone at 91. Not the clean-cut kid. Not the metal rebel. Just a man in a quiet house, still speaking to the woman he loved, believing he will see her again. He has lived long enough to be forgiven for some things and remembered for others. But when he talks about Shirley, none of the controversy matters. She was, he says, the love of his life. And after 65 years, that is not a headline. That is just the truth.